Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Greg McClymont.
Number one, sir.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Greg McClymont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the damaging uncertainty over future investment and jobs, which the Prime Minister's EU renegotiation strategy is creating in the business community, will the Prime Minister today give a guarantee that he will not support an outvote in any future in-out EU referendum?
Well, since I made the announcement that there should be an in-out referendum on Europe, actually the investment coming into Britain has gone up. And there are regularly times when Britain is getting more inward investment than the rest of Europe put together.
Nicola Blackwood.
Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to honour the bravery of NHS Ebola volunteers and welcome the news that nurse Pauline Kafaki is off the critical list. But as the Oxford Vaccine Group move to the next stage of their Ebola trial, will the Prime Minister congratulate them for their outstanding work so far and offer all possible support in the race to develop this vital vaccine?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this issue. I'm sure everyone is thinking of Pauline Kafaki, and it is very good news that she's out of critical care, but still there's a long way to go. I think what she says, my honourable friend says about developing a vaccine is vitally important. My right honourable friend, the Minister for Government Policy, is leading the work on this and making sure we do everything to try and cut through some of the bureaucracy that otherwise would be in place so that we can develop a vaccine fast.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, the whole country, across all faiths and communities, felt a sense of solidarity with the people of France following last week's dreadful attacks. Those who seek to terrorise and divide us should be in no doubt they will fail. And this House of Commons has sent a clear signal on this issue: we are united. Turning to the action that needs to be taken, does the Prime Minister agree with me that a key objective of our counter-terrorism efforts must be to prevent young people from being drawn into violent extremism in the first place? And does he also agree that the programme designed to tackle the problem, PREVENT, needs to be expanded so it supports in particular community-led action and is given the priority it deserves?
Well, first of all, let me agree with the right honourable gentleman about how important it is to stand together in favour of free speech, freedom of expression, the rule of law, democracy, the values that we hold dear. And I think that demonstration in Paris and the outpouring you've seen both here and around the world against these horrific attacks shows that these values will not be defeated. In terms of what the right honourable gentleman says about what must be done, we've got to prepare for any attack that could take place, and that means making sure we fund our counter-terrorism policing properly as we do. It means reaching out to potentially vulnerable groups and people, and I met, for instance, with the Jewish Leadership Council yesterday. But as he says, it also means confronting the poisonous narrative of Islamist extremism, and that is what we are doing through putting a duty on every public organisation to confront extremism wherever they find it, whether that is in universities or in schools, on campuses, in prisons or elsewhere, and that is what the PREVENT programme, which we're expanding, is also all about.
Ed Miliband.
Let me associate myself with what he said, in particular what he said about anti-Semitism and prejudice wherever we find it. Does he also agree on this point about British citizens who've travelled to Syria to participate in the conflict, with more than half of them having returned, that we need to do more? And in particular, does he agree that we need a much more rigorous approach, including compulsory engagement with de-radicalisation programmes to turn these people away from violent extremism?
I think it is right that we do everything we can to stop people travelling to Syria to take part in these activities, and that is what the counter-terrorism bill, which is going through the House of Lords right now, is aimed to do. But also, as he says, people coming back should be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and in every case it should be considered about whether they would benefit from going into a counter-radicalisation programme. What we've done with the PREVENT programme is we had the review by Lord Carlisle in 2011, and he found that the existing programme, and I quote, he said that there have been in cases where groups whom we'd now consider to support an extremist ideology have received funding. That's the reason why we changed Prevent. We're now expanding the programme, and as he says, we need to make sure that everyone who'd benefit from counter-radicalisation gets it. One final point, and I make this, I hope in a spirit of friendliness across the House. One or two people have referred to our current situation in Parliament as something of a zombie Parliament. Can I just make the point that this counter-terrorism bill, which is absolutely vital in defeating terrorism, is being discussed and debated in this House of Parliament right now?
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad we can work across parties on this issue, and we will endeavour to continue to do so. Now let me turn to an issue where there is less agreement. In May 2010, speaking about the TV debates, a party leader said, and I quote, "It would have been feeble to find some excuse to back out." So I thought, we've got to stick at this, we've got to do it. Can you remind us who said that?
I am all for these debates taking place, but you cannot have...
The question has been asked, and the answer must be heard. The Prime Minister.
I'm all for these debates, but you cannot have two minor parties without the third minor party. So I put the question to him. Why is he so frightened of debating the Green Party?
Mr. Speaker, I'll debate anyone the broadcasters invite. But the man who said it will be feeble to back out of the debates was him. Now we all understand that as long ago as last Thursday, his abiding passion was to give the Green Party a platform. But it is frankly a pathetic excuse. It's not for him. It's not for him. It's not for him, it's not for me, it's not for any party leader to decide who is in the debates. It's up to the broadcasters. That's the country we live in. Now, is he really telling the people of Britain that he's going to seek to deny them the TV debates if he doesn't get to choose who's in them?
We had a set of European elections this year, and UKIP and the Greens both beat the Liberal Democrats, I'm afraid to say. And you either have... it's very simple. You either have both of them, or you have none of them. So let me ask him again. Why is he so chicken when it comes to the Greens?
Mr. Speaker, there's only one person running scared of these debates, and that's this Prime Minister. And when he says he doesn't want to take part because of the Greens, nobody believes him. Not the people behind him, not the person next to him, not the country. However he dresses it up, everyone knows he's running scared. These debates don't belong to me, they don't belong to him, they belong to the British people. What does he think gives him the right to run away from these debates?
There are two credible sets of debates. You can either have a debate with all the national parties who appear in this House, or you can have a debate, or both, have a debate between the two people who'd become Prime Minister. Those are the credible debates. So I ask him again, when he looks at the Green Party, why is he so scared?
It's complete, Mr. Speaker. I'll debate anyone the broadcasters invite to debate. I think he does protest too much. He's run out of excuses. He's running scared of these debates. And in the words of his heroine, Lady Thatcher, he's frit.
Well, isn't it interesting, Mr. Speaker? With just 10 of these sessions to go, he wants to debate having a debate. He can't talk about unemployment because it's coming down. He can't talk about growth in the economy because it's going up. He can't talk about his energy price freeze because it's turned into a total joke. I have to say to him, Mr. Speaker, the more time he and I can spend in a television studio and on television, the happier I will be. Please, if he's got any more questions left, ask a serious one.
What
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the former Prime Minister, Mr. Blair, had to be summoned to the Select Committee to reluctantly give evidence. We now understand that the Director General of the BBC, Lord Hall, is refusing to give evidence to another Select Committee on the grounds that he's a Member of Parliament. He's also a paid public servant. Isn't it time that we reviewed the matter of parliamentary privilege in this place?
Well, I will look very carefully at what my honourable friend says. Obviously, it's a matter for the Select Committee and for the House, but the general rule should be that people involved in the senior management of the BBC, if they're summoned in front of a Select Committee, should come, because the BBC needs to be and is publicly accountable. I actually think that Lord Hall does a very good job at the BBC, and I'm sure he'd give a good account of himself, but I will have a careful look at what my honourable friend says.
Dr. Alan Whitehead.
At the Liaison Committee meeting on December 16th, the Prime Minister promised to look into the full publication of the extensively redacted DEFRA report on shale gas rural economy impacts. Has he looked into this, and is he now going to insist on full and unredacted publication?
I did look into the issue, but I don't want to give the honourable gentleman an inaccurate answer, so I will go and check about the action taken after that meeting and see what I can tell him.
Mr. Michael Fabricant.
In a speech last week, the Director General of MI5 identified a number of important gaps in their surveillance which does need to be addressed by law. Now, some of these have called them a breach of civil liberties. Others have said that it's just another snooper's charter. But doesn't the Prime Minister agree with me that public safety must come above everything else? And that civil liberty must include not being bombed, shot, or beheaded by some deranged jihadist?
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that the first duty of every government is to keep the country safe. We certainly don't do that by trashing our own civil liberties and traditions. But I believe when it comes to this vital issue of being able to have proper surveillance on the communications of potential terrorists, up until now, this Parliament and British governments have taken a very clear view. Whether it's been about looking at letters, whether it's been about fixed telephone communications or mobile communications, we have always believed that in extremis, on the production of a signed warrant from the Home Secretary, it should be possible to look at someone's communications to try and stop a terrorist outrage. And the decision I think we have to take is, are we prepared to allow in future, as technology develops, safe spaces for terrorists to communicate? The principle I think we should adopt is, no, we are not content for that to happen, and as a result, we should look to legislate accordingly.
Tom Harris.
Raif Badawi faces 1,000 lashes and 10 years in prison because he wrote some articles with which his government disagreed. Will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the barbaric and medieval regime of Saudi Arabia? And does he believe that our international alliances should be founded more on human rights and less on economic muscle?
We don't approve of these sorts of punishments, and we always raise these cases when British citizens are involved in the strongest possible way, and I know that we will on this occasion too.
Mr. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unemployment down 44%. Youth unemployment down 45%, long-term unemployment down 44%, business start-ups up 31%, 800 apprenticeship starts, all in the last year in Basildon and Thurrock. What does my right honourable friend think that says about our long-term economic plan?
Delighted with the news that my honourable friend brings. It is remarkable how in almost every constituency in this House, the number of people claiming unemployment benefit is down, the number of young people claiming benefit is down. If he looks at the east of England as a whole, there are 224,000 people, almost 250,000 more people in work in the east of England. Those are statistics, but every one of those statistics is about someone who is going out and earning a wage and supporting their family and managing to achieve a better standard of living. That is what we must continue with, and that is why we must stick to the long-term economic plan.
Nick Dakin.
eliminating the deficit, net migration down to the tens of thousands, no VAT rise, no top-down reorganisation of the NHS. Why did the Prime Minister make these promises, and why did he break them?
We said we would get the deficit down, and the deficit is down by half as a share of our national economy from the disgraceful situation left by Labour. I thought the honourable gentleman would take the opportunity to talk about the vital steel interests in his constituency, which we'll be talking about later on today, where I'm working as hard as we can to try and make sure we keep steel production growing in our country. But I have to say to him, as he's introduced a political element, so might I. Under this government, steel production is up where it was down under Labour. Under this government, employment in the steel industry is up where it was down under Labour. Why is that? Because we've got a car industry that's growing, we've got an aerospace industry that's growing, we've got construction that's growing. We're getting Britain back to work.
John Whittingdale.
Is my right honourable friend aware that in the past 12 months, over 60 journalists have been killed in the course of their work, including those at Charlie Hebdo last week? Just 5 weeks ago, I attended with several other members of Parliament the signing in Paris of a declaration by representatives of every European country recognising the vital role of journalists in a free society and pledging to do everything possible to protect their safety. Will my right honourable friend reaffirm that commitment today?
Well, I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for the work he does in supporting the freedom of the press, and I certainly reiterate what he says today. When this most struck me was actually when I visited Jaffna in northern Sri Lanka and went to see a newspaper office which had been shot up, bombed and burnt. And that brings home to you what journalists in other countries have for years faced in bringing the truth and putting in front of the people, which is a vital part of a free democratic system. And obviously the events in Paris are truly horrific. And I think the duty of everyone in public life is not necessarily to say whether or not we agree with this being published or that being published. Everyone can have their opinion. It's not that matters. What matters is we should always defend the right of people to publish whatever is inside the law and, in their opinion, right to publish. That's our job, and we must do it properly.
Mr. Speaker, we're seeing a meltdown in emergency care. Yet the Prime Minister's Health Secretary accuses us of whipping up a crisis. Isn't it time for some honesty? This government is simply failing our NHS.
Well, I'm grateful that the Honourable Lady raises the NHS because, absolutely, we do face real challenges this winter with the pressures on A&E, but her own constituency, the Homerton University Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, prove what can be done with the extra resources that we're putting in and the excellent management of that hospital, because last week 96.6% of people going to A&E in her constituency were seen within 4 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I met Chloe, a care assistant apprentice who had started her apprenticeship after visiting my most recent jobs fair in Hales-Owen. Would the Prime Minister congratulate all those people who have got jobs and started apprenticeships in my constituency since 2010, where unemployment has fallen by 30% in the last year alone? Further evidence that the government's long-term economic plan is delivering better quality jobs and opportunities for people across Hales-Owen and Rowley Regis.
I certainly join my honourable friend in congratulating Chloe on starting her apprenticeship. The fact is, in his constituency, nearly 4,000 people have begun an apprenticeship since 2010. And if you look at what has happened to the claimant count, as I said a few moments ago, in his constituency, the claimant count is down 42% since the election. The long-term youth claimant count, which should be of the greatest concern to us, because that is young people on unemployment benefit month after month, that is down by 58% in the last year alone. This recovery is gathering pace, it is providing jobs for people, and each one of those jobs is the chance for them to provide a better future for their families. But we've got to stick to the plan, and a key part of the plan is getting the deficit down.
Toby Perkin.
Our ambulance trusts are under such pressure that they're downgrading the calls of some of the sickest people in the country. In the east of England, 57 people are believed to have died waiting for an ambulance that never arrived. Isn't the Prime Minister ashamed that this is what happens when the Tories run the NHS?
clearly what happened in East Anglia was wrong, and the change was made without the knowledge of the Trust's board. As soon as it was found out, the chief executive reversed the decision and ordered an independent investigation, an investigation carried out by someone from outside the Trust, and the investigation found that there had been no harm to patients. I think it is important to put this in context. Now, he quite rightly says it's very important that we conduct this debate in a good and civilised way. Now, at the weekend, the Leader of the Opposition was asked 7 times whether he had used the phrase that he wanted to weaponise the NHS. 7 times he refused to answer the question. Everybody knows that he said those words, and if he had a shred of decency in him, he would get up and explain he shouldn't have said those words and apologise.
Mr. Stephen Lloyd. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago, a tragic event occurred in my constituency where a young 5-year-old girl, Andrea Garda, was killed in a traffic accident. Since then, Eastbourne and her school, Shinewater Primary, have rallied round to support the family, her parents. They have raised money to try and bring the grandparents and the aunt over from Zimbabwe to Eastbourne to join them at the funeral. The Home Office have refused to say and said the relatives may abscond. The parents have given me an undertaking this will not happen. I have even gone one step further and said I would act as a guarantor that the relatives will return to Zimbabwe. The Home Office decision is cruel and unkind. Prime Minister, will you intervene?
Well, it is absolutely horrific when children are killed in accidents like this, and we all in our own constituencies know of individual cases, and it's heartbreaking when it happens. I will certainly look at the case. I was just discussing it with the Home Secretary, and make sure the Home Office has a careful look to see what can be done.
Mr. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that the public and small businesses across the UK have had to endure very high fuel bills in recent years when oil prices averaged over $100 a barrel. In recent weeks, that price has been steadily dropping and now stands at less than half that. But fuel prices at the pump have not reduced by anything like that. Last week, the Chancellor indicated that some action would be taken against fuel companies. Can the Prime Minister outline what action?
Well, first of all, I think we should welcome this fall in oil prices. We're beginning to see prices fall quite substantially at the pumps, but I agree with him. We want to see that go further and faster. Some of it will depend on the buying strategies that the fuel companies had, but we will make sure that the competition authorities, the government, does everything it can to make sure those fuel prices are passed on.
Mr. Alex Shelbrook.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on the 30th of January, I shall be holding a dementia summit in my constituency of Elmington Rothwell, bringing together some of the fantastic work that voluntary organisations like WISE and Peter Smith in Rothwell have done to help dementia in the voluntary sector. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that dementia is one of the biggest challenges this country faces in this coming century? Does he also agree with me that you need a strong economy to be able to invest in dementia research?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. This is a crisis for our country, and it's been creeping up as a sort of silent crisis because the diagnosis rates for dementia haven't been high enough, and I don't think there's been enough action across our communities to join up and deal with it. That is now happening. There's a very clear dementia strategy. We're doubling the amount of money going into research. We're training many more people in our NHS and in our care homes to deal better with people with dementia, and also we're making sure more people in the community become dementia friends, with a target of over 1 million people becoming dementia friends. And we had a session in Cabinet the other day where every member of Cabinet became a dementia friend. But I commend what he's doing. I did the same in my constituency of getting together all of the organisations that can help people, so we spread the word about good practice, because people with dementia don't just need great health care, they need help whether they're at the post office or the bank or the building society or the bus or the train station. They need help in every part of their life, and we all have a role to play.
John Cryer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Royal College of Nursing, the number of nurses in London has fallen by 4,500. The Prime Minister says the number's rising. Who's right?
Right.
Well, the fact is, nationwide, we have 3,300 more nurses, and I can give him some figures for his own constituency. If we look at the NHS Redbridge Clinical Commissioning Group, This year it's getting an increase in funding of 4.79%, and the numbers of staff in that are up. If we look at, for instance, the Barts Hospital, what we had is that last week over 6,630 people were seen within 4 hours, and performance across the London area has been very good. I make one further point to him, which he might want to bring home to his own local authorities, and I think this is important when we consider what is happening in social care, is that he's got two authorities, Redbridge, who've seen their reserves go up by 65 million since 2010, and Waltham Forest have gone up by 26 million since 2010. That is what's happening, and that actually would provide. Finally, let me give him the information on Tower Hamlets, Waltham Forest and Newham as a whole in terms of the winter funding money. That has provided 22 more doctors, 27 more nurses, 146 more beds.
There are over 3 million people with diabetes in this country, and today Diabetes UK have published their State of the Nation report. It calls for education for people to prevent type 2 diabetes, education for people to know when to approach their GP with symptoms for type 1 or type 2, and education of people with the condition so that they can self-manage and take pressure off the NHS. Will the Prime Minister look at the report and act on its findings?
I will certainly look at this report, because I think of all the healthcare conditions there are, one of the ones which if we act on fastest, we could have a huge knock-on effect on the NHS is diabetes. If you look at the costs of things like amputations and other treatments because people getting diabetes, we could make an enormous impact. He raises the issue about being able to self-regulate. Well, there's an enormous amount of exciting new technology coming forward in terms of diabetes, and I want to make sure that technology is rapidly adopted by the NHS.
Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The independent OBR says that the government's long-term spending plans mean cutting 1 million public service workers. Could the Prime Minister tell the country which million public services he is planning to cut?
What the OBR say is exactly what the Treasury say, which is that everyone who last night voted for the fiscal mandate is committed to £30 billion of adjustment in the next 2 years. Now, on this side of the House, my party has set out exactly how we meet that. It is 13 billion of department cuts, 12 billion of welfare cuts, and 5 billion from tax evasion and avoidance. So far, the Labour Party has told us absolutely diddly squat about how they'd raise a single penny of that money. So the challenge for the Labour Party is, if you're going to sign up to £30 billion of adjustment, isn't it time you told us which taxes are going to go up, what you're going to do to debts, and how you're going to wreck this country's economy?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Has my honourable friend seen the story of White Van Allison in The Sun on page 6 today? Is my honourable friend aware that under this government, white van women are flourishing? Over 20% of businesses are run by women, and over 53% of apprenticeship starts are started by females. Does my honourable friend agree with me that white van women, especially from Essex, are the wheels of our long-term economic plan?
Absolutely, and those wheels must keep turning. I think it is important, as the point he makes. Of course, I look at The Sun every morning and was fascinated to see this article. But the fact is, under Labour, female unemployment went up by 24%. Under this government, the number of women in work is highest since records began. Now, the proportion of women-led businesses in our country is up by a third, but it's still true. If we could get the same level of female entrepreneurship in Britain as there is in America, we would virtually wipe out the remaining unemployment we have.
David Anderson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At 1 o'clock this afternoon, a petition will be laid at number 10 Downing Street by parents and children who are suffering from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It is calling on the Prime Minister personally to get involved to get NHS England to stop a bureaucratic internal debate which is preventing the licensing of the drug Translana, which could have an effect on young boys, which would mean they wouldn't have to go into a wheelchair, before it was absolutely necessary. At the moment, most of them are in a wheelchair before they get out into the teens. Will the Prime Minister personally get involved with this and get this resolved as a matter of urgency?
Now, I will try and find time to see these parents today. I was looking at this issue last night where their child's about exactly the same as my son, and I saw a picture of him in his local football team, just as my son plays for his local football team, and it made me think about how vital it is to get these drugs through as quickly as we can. I know there has been a debate about whether these drugs should be licensed quickly and all the issues and problems. I will meet them. I will have a look at this petition and see what can be done.
Mr. David Rutley.
Will my right honourable friend tell the House what is worse, to deny the deficit, to forget that it exists, or to have no plan to bring it back into balance?
I think, as it were, in the three stages of man, or at least the three stages of Miliband, I think we're now at the final part, which is, I think they have now finally accepted there is a deficit. They've now voted for £30 billion of adjustment, but they cannot manage to tell us how much they're going to raise in taxes, what they're going to do in spending. They've had 4.5 years to come up with an economic policy, and they've got absolutely no plan for our country.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
My 94-year-old constituent was taken by ambulance from her GP's to A&E at Charing Cross Hospital, where she waited 6 hours in a corridor before being admitted. The next morning, she was moved to another hospital because there were no beds available. Does the Prime Minister think that axing the A&E and all but 24 of 360 inpatient beds at Charing Cross, as he proposes, will make such appalling incidents more or less likely in the future?
The truth is that nationwide, 94% of people this year so far have been seeing their doctor within 4 hours at A&E. But everybody in this House knows, and everyone who is a neighbouring Member of Parliament of the Honourable Gentleman knows, that he is absolutely instrumental in spreading disinformation campaign after disinformation campaign about his local hospitals. And for once, he should take the truth and put it on a leaflet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some people are very quick to criticise when there are challenges in the NHS. It must also then be right to celebrate its successes. And therefore, will the Prime Minister congratulate Milton Keynes Hospital and the University of Buckingham for establishing a new medical school that will not only train the next generation of clinicians, but raise standards at our hospital?
No, I'm very happy to join my honourable friend in doing that. I mean, making sure we educate the next generation of doctors and nurses and clinicians is absolutely vital. And what we see under this government is 9,000 more doctors, 3,300 more nurses. We are treating 1.3 million more people in A&E, and there are 6 million more outpatient appointments. That's what's actually happening in our NHS, and all credit to the hard-working staff who are carrying out all that vital work.
Mr. Jim Sheridan.
Mr. Speaker, welfare benefit recipients are often demonised as a burden on our taxpayers. But does the Prime Minister agree that the real burden on taxpayers are those employers who can afford to pay well above the minimum wage today, thereby lifting hard-working families out of state dependency and food banks?
Well, I'm in favour of the living wage. I think those organisations that can pay the living wage should pay the living wage. I think it's a very good thing that should happen. But in addition to that, what we can help with, well, I noticed the Leader of the Opposition, Doncaster Council doesn't pay the living wage, so maybe he could start with his own backyard. Right. Let's shut him up. But in addition to that, and in addition to seeing minimum wages rise, we should also be taking the lowest paid people out of tax. And under this government, we've taken 3 million of the lowest paid people out of tax.
Order!